Emily Parker stood at her kitchen sink, staring out at the drizzle streaking down the window. The street outside was empty, quiet except for the soft patter of rain. She rubbed her hands on a dish towel, the steam from the kettle curling around her face. Daniel, her husband, sat across the kitchen table scrolling through his phone. His brow was furrowed, lips pressed together in that familiar tight line. They had been married 12 years, and lately, it felt as if the warmth between them had faded like sunlight behind clouds. They were polite to each other, careful, but something essential, laughter, longing, connection, had dimmed. Emily sighed and wiped her hands again. The silence in the house felt heavy, like it had been stretched too thin. Daniel's phone buzzed, but he didn't flinch. He was always somewhere else, even when he was here. She wanted to say something, to reach across the table and bridge the space between them, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she went back to the window, watching rain roll down the glass. Then the doorbell rang. It was late. Too late for visitors. Emily startled, her heart skipping a beat. Daniel looked up, just as startled. "I'll get it," he said. His voice was calm, but there was that shadow of hesitation she knew so well. When he opened the door, Emily saw a man standing there, drenched, shaking off rain. He looked to be in his 30s, with dark hair plastered to his forehead and a coat that did little to keep him warm. His eyes were tired, worn, but they carried something else too, an edge of desperation mixed with quiet hope. "Sorry to bother you," he said. His voice was low, careful. "My car broke down on Route 17. My phone's dead, and I didn't know where else to go." Daniel hesitated for just a moment before stepping aside. "Come in before you freeze," he said. Emily watched as the man stepped inside, rubbing his hands together. She noticed the way he avoided eye contact at first, like he didn't want to impose, but the relief on his face was undeniable. "I'm Lucas," he said. "Thanks." "Really?" Something about his tone made Emily's chest tighten. It wasn't just gratitude, it was vulnerability. And for reasons she couldn't explain, it struck a chord deep inside her. Daniel closed the door behind him. "Do you want some tea?" he asked, already moving toward the kitchen. Lucas nodded, shrugging off his wet coat. "That would be great." Emily went to the cupboard, grabbing 2 mugs. The quiet of the house had shifted. There was tension, but also a strange sense of anticipation, like something unknown had slipped in with the stranger. She poured the water and set the mugs on the counter. "You didn't have to let me in," Lucas said softly, his eyes meeting hers for a brief moment. There was gratitude there, yes, but also something else, an honesty that made her pulse quicken. "We all need someone once in a while," Emily replied. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. Daniel returned from the living room with a phone in hand. "Tow company says it'll take about an hour," he said. "You're welcome to wait here." Lucas gave a small, embarrassed smile. "Thanks. I know it's strange, showing up at someone's door like this." Emily shook her head. "Not at all." Her mind was already racing, noticing little things, the way his hands trembled slightly, the way he shifted on the couch, careful not to take up too much space. He looked like someone carrying more than just the discomfort of a broken car. Daniel leaned back in his chair, trying to make casual conversation. "So, what brings you up this way?" Lucas exhaled slowly. "Job interview. I was driving up from Boston, and, well, life had other plans." His smile was faint, tinged with fatigue. "I'm not usually this desperate." Emily felt a pang. Everyone had moments like this, she thought, moments where the world feels too big and you have no idea where to turn. She felt an urge to reach out, to comfort him in a way that wasn't just polite. Something about his quiet need reminded her of times she had felt lost and alone. As the 3 of them sat in the kitchen, the rain drumming steadily against the windows, Emily found herself stealing glances at Daniel. He was kind, reliable, solid. Always had been. But watching him interact with Lucas, this stranger, something shifted inside her. She realized she hadn't noticed how tired he had been, how quiet his laughter had become, or how much he used to care for her in ways that went beyond the routines of life. Lucas thanked Daniel again, his voice soft, almost embarrassed. "Really, you didn't have to do all this." Daniel waved it off. "It's no trouble. Happens to anyone." Emily felt her heart tighten. She could see the vulnerability in both men, one as a stranger needing help, the other as a husband who had slowly drifted away from her. And in that moment, she understood something uncomfortable. Her own longing for connection had been buried beneath daily life, and this stranger had unwittingly brought it to the surface. The kettle whistled, breaking the tension. Emily poured the water into the mugs, handing one to Lucas. The warmth of the tea in his hands seemed to settle something in him, and she found herself lingering near the counter, watching him. Lucas smiled again, this time more genuinely. "You're both really kind." "Thank you." Emily felt a strange flutter in her chest, a mix of empathy, curiosity, and something she didn't yet have words for. She realized the evening had become more than just a courtesy visit. Something had shifted in their home, subtle but undeniable. Daniel glanced at her, then back at Lucas, sensing perhaps the quiet tension but unsure of what it meant. He was kind, he was protective, but he didn't see the stirrings Emily felt, the reminder of what it felt like to care deeply, to be drawn toward another human being in need. The rain outside intensified, tapping insistently against the windows. Lucas's presence had filled the room with a strange, emotional electricity. Emily couldn't explain why she felt this way, only that she did. And she had no idea yet that this night, the night a stranger knocked on their door, would ripple through her life in ways she could never have imagined. Because in that moment, with rain outside, tea in hand, and a quiet house filled with unspoken tension, something had shifted. The ordinary, safe rhythm of her marriage had been disturbed, not violently, not dramatically, but enough to awaken something long dormant inside her heart. And Emily, standing quietly in the kitchen, realized the calm she had thought she had in her life was not quite what it seemed. The knock on the door had opened more than a way for a stranger to wait out the rain. It had opened the possibility of change. The rain didn't let up. It fell steadily, a soft drum against the roof, while inside, Emily, Daniel, and Lucas settled into the living room. The warm glow of the fireplace cast flickering shadows across the walls. The house, usually quiet in these late hours, now felt alive in a way Emily hadn't noticed in months. Lucas sat on the edge of the couch, hands wrapped around the mug of tea Emily had poured for him. His fingers still trembled slightly, though he tried to hide it. Every so often, he glanced at Daniel, who had moved to the armchair, leaning back comfortably, trying to make Lucas feel at ease. But it was clear the stranger carried a heavy weight, more than a broken-down car could explain. Emily watched him carefully. There was a vulnerability in his posture, a tension in the way he exhaled. She noticed the faint lines around his eyes, the slight slump in his shoulders. He looked like someone who had learned to carry disappointment quietly, like he was used to swallowing it alone. "I hate asking for help," Lucas said softly, almost as if admitting it aloud made it worse. Emily nodded. "It's not easy. We all feel that way sometimes." Lucas looked at her then, eyes meeting hers for a fleeting moment. There was gratitude there, but also something deeper, something raw. He looked at her as though he had been holding back a storm inside him, and finally, it was safe to breathe. Emily felt her heart tighten. She didn't understand why, but the feeling was undeniable. Daniel returned from the kitchen, holding a blanket. "Here, it's a little chilly. Might help you warm up," he said. He draped it over Lucas's shoulders, careful not to invade his personal space. Lucas laughed lightly, a sound that seemed surprised even to him. "Thanks. You're really kind." Daniel shrugged, trying to sound casual, but Emily saw the small smile tug at his lips. Daniel was kind, always had been, but lately, kindness had felt routine, mechanical. And yet here, it seemed natural again, genuine. They sat in silence for a moment, the crackle of the fireplace filling the space. Emily felt the tension in the room shift. It wasn't uncomfortable, more like the calm before something important. Something unsaid was lingering between them, and she could feel it pressing gently against her chest. "So," Daniel asked finally, trying to start a normal conversation, "what kind of work are you in?" "Urban planning," Lucas said. "Or at least, that was the plan. Things haven't gone as expected the past year. Company downsized. Been moving from contract to contract." He looked down at his mug, swirling the tea absent-mindedly. Emily's heart softened. She knew what it felt like to have life throw you off balance, to feel like your plans had collapsed overnight. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Lucas looked up, a faint, sad smile crossing his face. "Thanks. It's just hard. You think you're doing everything right, and suddenly, nothing works." He paused, staring into the fire. "My wife and I, we didn't survive it. We tried, but it wasn't enough." The words landed heavily in the room. Emily felt her chest tighten. She glanced at Daniel, who looked thoughtful, his jaw tight. They had been married for 12 years, long enough to see that life could be unforgiving, but somehow, hearing someone else admit it so openly made it real. Lucas continued, voice soft, almost hesitant. "We stopped talking about what mattered. Thought routine and stability were enough. Turns out, they weren't. And when I realized it, it was too late." Emily swallowed. The story sounded familiar, even though it wasn't hers. There was a quiet ache in it, the ache of love slipping through your fingers because life distracted you, because small moments of distance became years of silence. Daniel shifted in his chair. "That happens more than people admit," he said, his voice low. Lucas nodded, staring into the flames. "Yeah. I didn't notice how lonely we both were until it was over." Emily's eyes lingered on her husband. She realized, with sudden clarity, that she had been feeling a similar distance for months, not as dramatic, not as heartbreaking, but enough to leave a hollow space between them. Watching Lucas, hearing his words, she recognized the same quiet despair she sometimes felt creeping into her own marriage. She moved closer to the couch, almost unconsciously, as Lucas's voice faded into the crackle of the fire. "It's scary, realizing you took something for granted," he continued. "You wake up one day, and the person you love is gone in a way you can't fix." Emily felt tears prick at her eyes. Not for Lucas, exactly, not entirely, but for all the moments she had let pass without saying the words she wanted to say, for the distance that had grown between her and Daniel without either of them realizing it. Daniel noticed her movement and reached out, lightly brushing his hand against hers. The contact was gentle, almost casual, but it carried weight. Emily turned slightly, meeting his gaze, and saw something there she had almost forgotten: concern, care, love that hadn't disappeared, just waited for recognition. Lucas shifted uncomfortably. "Sorry, I didn't mean to unload all that. You've done enough just letting me sit here." Emily shook her head. "It's okay. Sometimes strangers hear things friends don't." He smiled again, a soft, grateful expression that made Emily's chest ache in an unfamiliar way. She realized she was drawn to him, not in a romantic way, not yet, but drawn to the honesty he brought, the reflection of truths she hadn't spoken aloud, even to Daniel. Daniel finally spoke, voice steady. "It sounds like you've been through a lot. But you're here now. And we're glad to help." Lucas nodded, and for a moment, all three of them sat quietly, letting the warmth of the fire fill the room. The rain continued to fall outside, tapping steadily against the windows, but inside, something had shifted. Emily felt it in the small, almost imperceptible way Daniel leaned slightly closer, in the way Lucas's shoulders relaxed for the first time since he arrived. Emily thought about her own marriage, the quiet evenings, the polite conversations, the love that had dulled into routine. And she realized that what had been missing wasn't grand gestures or dramatic moments, but attention, presence, the willingness to see and hear each other fully. Lucas broke the silence again. "You're both really kind. It's more than I expected." Emily smiled faintly. "Sometimes people surprise you. Especially when you need them." And in that moment, she felt a spark of hope, a reminder that connection wasn't gone, that love could be nurtured again if they paid attention. She looked at Daniel, at the man she had chosen years ago, and felt the longing for the warmth they had once shared return quietly, like the first rays of sunlight through a cloudy sky. The clock ticked, unnoticed, as the three of them sat by the fire. Outside, the rain softened into a mist, but inside, emotions moved like a gentle current, unspoken, real, and unavoidable. Emily knew, even as she felt the stirrings of her own heart, that the night was far from over. The stranger in their living room had brought more than a temporary guest. He had brought reflection, vulnerability, and a mirror they weren't ready for, but couldn't ignore. And in the flickering glow of the fireplace, Emily understood the truth she had been avoiding. Sometimes, it takes seeing someone else's struggle to recognize what you've lost in your own life, and to realize how much you still have to fight for. Lucas had come seeking help, but what he brought with him was something far greater: awareness, a reminder, and a gentle nudge toward change. Emily and Daniel could feel it, even if they didn't speak it aloud yet. Something was shifting, and it would not go back to the quiet routine that had defined their marriage for so long. The rain continued to fall, the fire continued to crackle, and in that quiet living room, the three of them sat together, connected in unexpected ways. And Emily knew that nothing about that night would ever feel ordinary again. The fire crackled softly in the living room, casting shadows that danced along the walls. The rain had slowed to a mist, tapping gently on the windows, but inside, the atmosphere was electric. Emily sat near the edge of the couch, her hands wrapped around her mug, while Daniel leaned back in the armchair, watching Lucas with careful attention. Lucas seemed different now, slightly more relaxed, but still carrying that invisible weight of life's disappointments. He had taken a sip of his tea, fingers tracing the rim of the mug, and for a moment, the room was silent except for the fire and the soft hum of the rain. "So," Daniel asked, his voice casual but steady, "what else should we know about you? Your life, I mean. Sometimes hearing a story helps take the weight off." Lucas looked up, hesitation flickering in his eyes. He gave a faint, self-conscious laugh. "You really want the whole story?" Emily smiled gently. "Only what you're comfortable sharing." He exhaled slowly and leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "I was married once," he began. 8 years. We were happy, I think, for a long time. But life has a way of pulling things apart when you least expect it." Daniel nodded slightly, attentive, as Lucas continued. "The work I loved disappeared. I thought we were strong enough to handle it. I thought routine, stability, and commitment were enough to hold us together. But it wasn't." His voice cracked a little, and he looked down at the fire. "We stopped talking about what mattered. Little things, big things, all the things you don't notice until it's too late." Emily's heart ached for him. She had felt the same kind of distance creeping into her own marriage over the years: small silences, missed glances, things left unsaid until they grew too heavy to ignore. She noticed Daniel shift, his eyes lingering on Lucas with a mix of sympathy and thoughtfulness. Lucas looked up then, his gaze moving between the two of them. "It's strange," he said softly. "You think you know someone, you think you're enough for each other, and suddenly, it all changes. You realize the person you love most could drift away without even noticing." Emily felt a shiver. She glanced at Daniel, whose expression was unreadable for a moment. Then, he leaned forward slightly, as if inviting her into the conversation without speaking a word. She understood, he was trying, in his way, to reconnect. "I didn't realize how lonely we were until the end," Lucas said, his voice almost a whisper now. "And by then, it was too late. We had stopped reaching for each other long before we stopped loving each other. Sometimes love isn't enough if it isn't spoken, if it isn't nurtured." Emily's fingers tightened around her mug. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she didn't move. She didn't need to. The story was enough. The honesty was enough. And more than that, it stirred something deep inside her, a recognition of what she had been neglecting in her own marriage. Daniel cleared his throat gently. It's hard to admit, he said slowly, but that happens more than people like to talk about. Lucas nodded. Exactly. You think it won't happen to you, that you're different. But it does. It sneaks up quietly. The routine becomes normal. The closeness fades. And one day, you realize the person beside you isn't fully there anymore. Emily's chest tightened. She realized how much she had been avoiding the truth herself. She had been living next to Daniel, sharing a home and a life, but some part of them had been drifting apart without words. The distance wasn't dramatic, there were no fights, no shouting, but it was there, quiet and persistent. She found herself leaning forward, drawn into Lucas's story, not by attraction but by the reflection of truths she had been avoiding. It's terrifying, she said softly, almost to herself. To realize you could lose someone without even knowing it. Lucas looked at her then, eyes meeting hers fully. Yes. That's exactly it. You only notice when it's almost gone. And sometimes, by then, it's too late to fix. Daniel's hand brushed against hers on the couch. She felt a jolt, a reminder that he was still there, that he still wanted her. That small touch was grounding, anchoring her in the reality of what truly mattered. She realized that while Lucas's story was painful, it was also a mirror. It reflected what she and Daniel could not afford to ignore. Lucas exhaled, a faint smile tugging at his lips. I shouldn't be unloading all of this on you. You've been kind enough already. I don't want to overstay my welcome. Emily shook her head, smiling softly. It's okay. Sometimes strangers hear what friends don't. And sometimes, strangers make you realize what you've been missing. Lucas looked surprised but grateful. There was a quiet honesty in that exchange, a recognition of shared humanity. Emily felt the words resonate in a place she hadn't felt in years, an awareness of what love required, attention, presence, willingness to notice and speak. Daniel spoke again, voice low but firm. We're glad you came. It's good to talk sometimes, even when life feels messy. Lucas nodded, glancing at the fire. Yeah. It is. For a while, they all sat in quiet, listening to the fire, the soft mist outside, the small, almost imperceptible rhythm of hearts slowly opening. Emily realized something she hadn't in months: the distance she had felt from Daniel wasn't permanent. It had been there, yes, but it could be healed with honesty, attention, and courage. She stole a glance at Daniel, noticing the lines of tension around his eyes, the way his hand lingered near hers. She remembered the man she had fallen in love with, the man who once stayed up talking with her until dawn, who had made her feel seen and cherished. And she realized that he was still that man, still capable of love, if she and he chose to reach for it. Lucas stirred, standing slowly. I should probably let you both get some rest. The tow truck should be here soon, and I don't want to impose any longer than I have. Emily stood too, surprising herself by how reluctant she felt to let him go. Thank you, she said softly. Not just for letting us help, but for reminding us how important it is to speak the truth, even when it's hard. Lucas's gaze met hers. I'm glad, he said quietly. I hope it helps. Daniel stood as well, offering a hand to Lucas. Take care of yourself, he said. And good luck tomorrow. Lucas smiled faintly, a mix of relief and gratitude. Thank you. I'll be okay. He stepped toward the door, and Emily felt a pang of sadness as the moment slipped away. Not sadness for him, exactly, but for the fragility of connection, for the realization of how easily life could let people drift apart. Once he left, the house felt quieter, different somehow. The warm fire still glowed, but Emily noticed the absence of the stranger's presence. And yet, something lingered in the air. A tension, a reflection, a soft reminder that life was fragile, love was precious, and it required attention. Emily sat back down on the couch, Daniel moving closer to her. His arm brushed hers lightly. She felt the familiar comfort of his presence, and at the same time a new awareness. They had been coexisting, surviving, but now they had a choice. They could actively choose each other, reach for each other, and nurture what had been neglected. She looked at him, eyes softening. "He made me think," she said quietly. Daniel turned toward her, expression attentive. "About what?" Emily hesitated, then said the truth, "About us. About what we've been missing." Daniel nodded slowly, as if he had been waiting to hear it. "I think I've been missing it too. And I want to fix it. I want to notice again. Not just survive, but really, be with you." Emily felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were not sad. They were hopeful. The room, once heavy with tension, now held possibility. They had been shaken by a stranger's story, reminded of life's fragility, and now faced the choice to reconnect with intention and care. The fire crackled, the rain softened outside, and Emily leaned back, letting Daniel's hand find hers. It was a small gesture, but full of promise. The night had brought more than a visitor seeking help, it had brought clarity, reflection, and the quiet beginnings of a second chance. And Emily knew, as she watched Daniel and felt the warmth of the fire, that the hardest part of love wasn't holding on, it was noticing when it mattered most, and choosing it again. Every single day, after Lucas left, the house felt unusually quiet. The warmth of the fire flickered against the walls, and Emily realized she could hear her own breathing. The subtle sounds of the house, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft tick of the clock, the whisper of the wind against the windows, seemed louder somehow. It was as if the presence of the stranger had shifted the energy, leaving behind a space for reflection that neither she nor Daniel could ignore. Daniel hung his coat by the door, moving slowly, as if he too was processing what had just happened. He glanced at Emily, noticing her stillness, the way her hands rested lightly on her knees. "He made you think," he said gently, his voice breaking the quiet. Emily turned toward him, meeting his gaze. "Yes," she admitted. "About us. About what we've been missing." Daniel took a step closer, his eyes softening. "I've been thinking too," he said. "We've been surviving, Emily. That's all. We've kept life moving, kept the bills paid, the house in order, but we stopped noticing each other. Really noticing." Emily felt her chest tighten. She had been aware of it, in small, nagging ways, the quiet dinners, the unspoken frustrations, the longing for something she couldn't name. And now, hearing him say it out loud, she felt relief mixed with vulnerability. She had feared he might not feel it, or worse, that he had stopped caring entirely. But here he was, admitting the truth, and it felt like a bridge across the distance that had grown between them. Daniel sat beside her on the couch, leaving a careful space, giving her room to breathe, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body. Emily leaned slightly toward him, drawn by the familiarity and comfort she hadn't realized she had missed so much. "I thought maybe I was imagining it," Emily confessed, voice low. The distance. The silence. "I thought maybe I was the only one feeling it." Daniel shook his head. "No. I felt it too. I just didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to start talking about it without making it worse." And then tonight, seeing him, listening to his story, it was like a mirror. A warning. "And it made me realize I don't want that for us." Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. She reached out, letting her hand rest on his. He took it gently, lacing their fingers together. The simple touch felt electric, grounding, like the first spark of a flame long buried beneath ash. "We've been surviving," he repeated, "but we don't have to. We can choose each other again. Not just in words, but in moments. In the way we look at each other, talk to each other, even touch each other. Every day." Emily's heart lifted. She leaned her head lightly against his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "I miss us," she whispered. "The way we used to be. The late-night talks, the silly laughter, the way we'd share our fears without holding back." Daniel wrapped his arm around her, pulling her slightly closer. "We can have that again. We just have to want it. And act on it. Not wait for someone else to remind us what matters." The fire flickered, casting shadows that danced along the walls. The room felt alive again, warm and comforting, a safe space for two people who had been reminded of what they almost lost. Emily realized that Lucas, the stranger, had left more than a temporary presence in their home. He had left clarity, a reflection of their own life and love, and the nudge they needed to confront the truths they had avoided for too long. Emily lifted her head to meet Daniel's eyes. They were tender, honest, full of the same love she had fallen for years ago, just hidden beneath routine. She felt a rush of emotion, gratitude, relief, longing, and in that moment, the distance that had grown between them seemed to vanish. "I want to choose us," she said, voice steady now, filled with resolve. "I don't want to let life drift us apart." Daniel smiled, a soft, almost shy smile. "I want that too. Every day, if it takes it." The words hung in the air, weighty but comforting. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic declaration, no sudden revelation, just quiet acknowledgement, a mutual understanding that they were ready to fight for what they had. The slow rebuilding of trust and intimacy didn't need fireworks, it needed honesty, attention, and care. They sat together in silence, letting the warmth of the fire fill the spaces where distance had once been. Outside, the rain had stopped entirely, leaving behind a soft mist that blurred the edges of the world beyond their windows. Inside, everything felt sharper, more real. Every heartbeat, every glance, every small movement between them carried meaning. Emily rested her head on Daniel's shoulder again, breathing in the faint scent of his coat and the comforting warmth of his presence. "I never want to take this for granted again," she said softly. "You won't," he replied. "Not now. Not after tonight. We've been reminded what matters. And I don't want to lose sight of it again." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but this time, they were tears of hope. Tears for the love that had endured, for the lessons learned, and for the chance to start again with intention. She realized that love wasn't something static, it was alive, fragile, and needed constant care. Daniel leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. It was not a showy gesture, not meant to impress anyone, but full of meaning. It was a promise. A reassurance. A beginning. Emily smiled against his shoulder, letting herself feel the weight of relief and joy. She thought about Lucas, the man who had needed help and unintentionally reminded them of their own love. He had come into their lives for a brief moment, but the impact lingered. He had left behind a mirror, showing them what they could not afford to ignore. For the first time in months, Emily felt fully present. Not distracted by routines, not weighed down by unspoken frustrations, not lost in the monotony of survival. She felt alive, aware, and deeply connected to the man beside her. Daniel tightened his hold around her, and she leaned into him, letting the firelight and warmth envelope them both. They didn't need words anymore. The understanding, the commitment, the intention, they were all there, unspoken but undeniable. Outside, the world was misty and calm, but inside, their hearts were wide awake. Emily realized that sometimes, it takes an unexpected encounter to remind you of what you already have, and what you almost let slip away. The stranger's presence had been fleeting, but the impact was permanent. They stayed there, side by side, holding hands, sharing the quiet comfort of closeness. Emily rested her head against Daniel's shoulder one last time, letting herself feel the fullness of love that had been hidden for too long. It was steady, real, and waiting for them to nurture it again. "I love you," she whispered finally, breaking the silence. Daniel smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I love you too. And I'm choosing us every day, from now on." The fire flickered, casting golden light across their faces. The house was quiet, but it felt full. Full of warmth, full of life, and full of promise. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind clarity and a chance to rebuild. Emily closed her eyes, feeling safe, loved, and seen. The distance that had lingered between her and Daniel was gone, replaced with awareness, intention, and renewed commitment. And as the night deepened, she realized something profound: love could always be rediscovered, if only you chose to notice it, nurture it, and never take it for granted again. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. It was real, steady, and lasting. And for Emily and Daniel, that was more than enough.